He humiliated me while they watched. By sundown they all regretted it. The sun had barely risen over the kingdom of Eldara, yet the court already buzzed with whispers, laughter, and the clinking of silver cups. The grand hall was a palace of marble and gold, where nobles draped in velvet and silk moved like shadows in a dance of power. It was a place where every glance, every gesture, carried meaning. And today Alara, daughter of a minor noble, would face a humiliation that would leave her heart trembling. Alara walked with her head high, her hands lightly brushing the folds of her deep green gown. Her dark hair was braided with silver threads, shimmering faintly in the morning light. Though her family had little power compared to the lords and ladies of the court, she carried herself with dignity and a quiet confidence that drew curious eyes. She was known for her sharp mind and calm demeanor. But what the court did not know was that she possessed a rare gift. She could catch glimpses of the threads of fate, fleeting moments of the future. As she entered the hall, the chatter softened. Her presence was not commanding in a traditional sense, yet it carried a subtle weight. And then he arrived. Lord Darien, the most feared and admired noble in the kingdom, swept into the hall. Dark-haired, with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through masks and lies, he carried himself with the confidence of one who knew that all eyes followed his every step. Where he went, the air seemed colder, charged with tension. Alara had seen him before, of course, and she had always found him infuriatingly proud. He had a cruel streak, and it often manifested in public displays meant to shame others. Today, he had set his sights on her. The court had gathered for the morning audience, a ceremonial ritual where nobles presented news, requests, or offerings to the king. Alara had been summoned to speak about the harvests in her region, an innocuous matter, and one she had prepared carefully for. Yet, before she could take a step forward, Darien's voice rang out, smooth and cutting, slicing the hall's air like a sword. "Ah, the little seer of Brighthallow," he said, smirking. "Here to tell us how the flowers bloom and the sun rises? Surely we do not need visions for such trivialities." A ripple of laughter passed through the hall. Some nobles tried to hide smiles behind fans, while others stared, unsure if they should join in. Elara's face heated with embarrassment, yet she forced herself to stand tall, her hands clasped before her.
"I report what I see in the lands, my lord," she said calmly, though her voice shook slightly.
Not trivialities, but matters of consequence to the people and the crown. Darien's smirk widened, and he leaned forward, addressing the king as if speaking on her behalf.
"Your Majesty, she claims to see the threads of fate."
Yet, when asked about the harvest, she speaks as if the sun and rain obey her whim. Is this wisdom or the folly of imagination?
Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She had expected scrutiny, even doubt, but never this brazen public mockery. Her face burned, her stomach twisted in humiliation. She had walked into the hall with dignity, but now the world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She caught a flash of Darien's dark eyes, sharp and assessing. There was no malice in them, not truly. Or perhaps there was. She could not tell. Burst. All she knew was the sting of shame, made worse because everyone was watching. The king, an older man with gray hair and a thoughtful gaze, frowned but said nothing. He had little patience for courtly theatrics, yet he rarely interfered when lords clashed. Alara felt the cold weight of isolation settle over her like a cloak. For a moment she considered retreating, fleeing the hall and hiding from the eyes that judged her. But then she remembered her gift, the faint glimpses of the future that whispered possibilities. And in one flash she saw a choice. Submission would lead to defeat and despair. But courage, however faint, could open doors even she could not yet imagine. Swallowing her fear, she raised her chin. The threads of fate are not so simple as to serve only the powerful, Lord Darien, she said. They move as they will, and sometimes the smallest hand can guide them. The hall fell into a stunned silence. Inspiration. Darien's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. He had underestimated her, and that was dangerous. But the moment passed quickly. Darien laughed again, sharp and cold, as if to remind everyone of her supposed inferiority. How charming, he said, that she believes a hand so small can change the course of destiny. We shall see, shall we not? With that, he turned, his cloak swishing, leaving her exposed to the curious and skeptical gazes of the court. Alara's hands clenched at her sides. She felt humiliated, yes, but a spark had ignited within her.
She would not allow this to define her. Later, in the quiet of her chambers, Ilara sat by the window, overlooking the palace gardens.
Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, pale face, dark eyes filled with fire, lips pressed in determination. She thought of Darien, of the cruel words, and of the laughter that had echoed in the hall. It was a wound, yes, but also a challenge. She could see the threads of what might come. And the threads whispered of power, of opportunity, of transformation. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the palace seemed to exhale into darkness. The moon rose, pale and cold, casting silver light across the towers. Elara wandered into the empty corridors, drawn to the forbidden wing of the palace, a place where even servants whispered of shadows and secrets. It was said that ancient spirits lingered there, remnants of the old kingdom before Eldera rose to its current glory.
A faint rustle of silk behind a heavy curtain caught her attention. She hesitated but stepped forward.
From the shadows, a figure emerged, unlike any she had seen. Cloaked in a gown that shimmered like night itself, the figure's eyes glowed faintly, almost silver, and a voice like wind through leaves spoke. You seek change, it said, and the courage to stand against those who would see you diminished. Elara's pulse quickened.
Ooh.
Who are you? She asked. I am a witness of the threads, the figure said.
I see what you cannot yet claim. The power to turn humiliation into strength lies within you, if you dare to grasp it. Elara's mind raced. The temptation was dangerous. Yes, she knew that. Power without control could destroy her. Yet the memory of the hall, of Darien's laughter burned in her heart like a brand. She wanted to rise, to show the court, to show the world that she was more than a victim. What must I do? She whispered, her voice trembling between fear and hope. Walk the path of shadow and light, the figure replied. Learn to bend the threads without breaking yourself. But beware, those who meddle with fate are watched by forces older and colder than kings. One wrong step, and they will consume you. Elara nodded, though her hands shook. She did not fully understand the power she might claim, nor the danger it might bring, yet a strange certainty filled her. She would not be humiliated again. Not by him, not by the court, not by fear itself. As the figure faded into the darkness, leaving only a whisper and the faint scent of winter roses, Elara felt a pulse of energy, subtle but unmistakable, coursing through her veins. It was a promise, or perhaps a warning. She did not know which. The next morning, the court awaited her again. The memory of her humiliation lingered, but so did the spark of determination. She walked into the hall with her head held high, feeling the weight of possibilities settle over her. She had tasted fear. She had felt shame, but she had also glimpsed power, hidden, dangerous, and hers to claim. And somewhere in the hall, watching, Lord Darien's eyes narrowed. He did not know it yet, but the game had changed. The girl he had humiliated was no longer simply prey. She was a player. And by sundown, the balance of power would shift. Alara's heart beat in her chest like a drum. She would survive this court. She would grow stronger. And she would never forget the sting of humiliation that had ignited a fire she did not yet fully understand. The shadows whispered in the corners of the hall, and the threads of fate trembled in the unseen winds. For Alara the path had begun, winding through danger longing, and the unseen powers that watched all who dared to rise. And as the day wore on, the whispers in the court grew louder. For the girl who had been humiliated was no longer silent, and everyone would come to regret underestimating her. The sun sank behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in crimson and gold. And in the fading light, Ilara felt it clearly. The story had only just begun. The moon hung low over Eldara, its silver light spilling across the palace gardens. Shadows stretched long, twisting between marble statues and dark hedges. Elara moved quietly along the stone paths, her green gown rustling softly. The humiliation of the morning still lingered like a bitter taste, but beneath it, a fire had been lit, a fire that whispered of possibilities, of power waiting for her to claim it.
Her steps led her to the forbidden wing of the palace where even the servants dared not linger.
It was here, in the quiet, that the shadows seemed alive. The air was thick with whispers, old and soft, as if the walls themselves remembered secrets long forgotten. She paused before a tall archway, carved with strange symbols that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. The silver-threaded braid in her hair seemed to tremble with the same anticipation that thumped in her chest. From the darkness emerged the figure she had seen the night before. Cloaked in garments that shimmered like night itself, it stepped toward her, eyes glowing faintly like distant stars.
"You have come," the figure said, voice like wind through autumn leaves. "The threads have moved since yesterday."
You are no longer the same girl who trembled under their laughter. You have chosen to seek power, and it has chosen you in return. Alara's heart beat fast. I do not know if I am ready, she whispered, though deep down she knew she was. The memory of the court's laughter and Darien's cruel smirk had carved a space in her soul that demanded change. Readiness matters little, the figure said. Only courage. You may walk the path of shadow and light, but beware. Every choice twists the threads, and every thread bends toward consequence. What must I do?
The figure extended a hand, and a faint silver mist rose, curling around Alara's fingers like smoke. To gain power, you must first understand it.
You will enter the Forest of Whispers, where the curse of Eldara has lingered for centuries. There, you will face trials that test your mind, your heart, and your will. Only those who can embrace both light and darkness may return with true strength.
Elara swallowed the weight of her decision, heavy but exhilarating.
She had glimpsed the future, yes, but now the threads of fate seemed tangible, almost within reach.
I will go, she said, her voice steady.
I will face whatever awaits. The figure nodded, fading into the shadows as the silver mist lingered, a promise of power and danger alike.
The next morning, the court went about its business as if nothing had changed.
Yet Alara moved differently. The humiliation from before was still a fresh wound, but she felt an unfamiliar strength coiling inside her, like a quiet storm waiting to break.
Lord Darien noticed immediately. He had expected fear or submission from her, but instead he found something dangerous. Her eyes, dark and steady, held a spark that challenged him. Inspiration.
The very sight unsettled him. You seem
Different today, he remarked, his tone casual, but his sharp gaze betrayed curiosity.
Did the morning sun bring wisdom, or are you plotting yet another foolish attempt at grandeur? Alara allowed herself a small, measured smile.
Perhaps a bit of both, she said. There was no fear in her voice now, only a calm determination. Darian frowned, sensing a change he could not yet define. By midday, the whispers of the Forbidden Wing had pulled Alara into action. Inspiration. She slipped quietly from the palace, moving toward the edge of the forest, the trees looming like ancient sentinels.
The Forest of Whispers was not merely dark, it was alive.
Frowned. Shadows moved of their own accord, and the air was heavy with the scent of old magic. Legends spoke of travelers who entered and never returned, consumed by illusions, curses, or the forest's hunger for souls. Alara took a deep breath and stepped into the shade. The sunlight that filtered through the leaves danced across her path, but she did not waver. Inspiration. She felt the threads of fate pulling taut, guiding her deeper. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, her senses alert to the faintest sound or shift in shadow. Inspiration. Soon, she came upon a clearing. In its center stood a stone pedestal, covered in strange carvings. Inspiration. A soft glow pulsed from the symbols, illuminating the forest with an otherworldly light. Inspiration. Alara approached, feeling the energy hum beneath her fingertips. She placed her hand on the stone, and the forest seemed to inhale, holding its breath.
You seek strength! A voice whispered from the air itself, echoing around her. But strength is not given lightly.
It must be earned, understood, and controlled. Are you willing to embrace what others fear?
Inspiration.
I am. The glow from the pedestal swirled, coalescing into a silver light that wrapped around her hands and arms. She felt power surge through her, an energy unlike anything she had known.
It was intoxicating, and yet it demanded control. The whispers of the forest filled her mind, offering visions of the future, the court, Darian, and the danger approaching the kingdom. Every vision carried lessons, challenges, and temptations. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed meaningless here.
Until the light finally receded.
Alara stood alone, but she was changed. The forest had tested her resolve, and she had passed. She felt a faint tingle in her mind, a connection to the threads of fate that would guide her in subtle ways. As she turned to leave, the shadows stirred once more. From the trees stepped a figure draped in dark leather and silver armor. Darian. Inspiration. You? She whispered, startled though she quickly masked it with calm. I followed, he admitted, his voice low. Inspiration.
Curiosity, I suppose, and
I wondered if the little seer of Bright Hallow could survive the Forest of Whispers.
Alara's eyes narrowed. Her tapestry.
And do you find what you sought? Darian's expression was unreadable, but she could sense the flicker of something new, respect, perhaps even a hint of admiration. Perhaps, he said slowly.
I did not expect this. The forest seemed to close around them, and for a moment they were alone, two people standing at the edge of fate itself.
Inspiration. The tension between them was sharp, a blend of rivalry, fascination, and unspoken questions. Inspiration. Neither moved, and yet the world felt suspended. You have changed, Darian finally said. Inspiration. The fire I thought I saw yesterday, it has grown.
Elara's lips curved in a small, wry smile. And you still underestimate me.
He studied her then, after a long pause, nodded once.
Inspiration. Perhaps I should not. They turned together toward the palace, moving in silence through the forest. Neither spoke of what had happened in the clearing, but both felt the subtle shift. They were no longer simple adversaries. The balance of power between them had begun to tilt. Back in the court, rumors began to spread. Nobles whispered of Alara's disappearance, speculating on what she had encountered in the forest. Some feared she had been consumed by the dark magic. Others marveled at her courage. Yet no one knew the truth, only that she had returned with a new aura, a subtle confidence that demanded attention. Darian watched from his seat near the king, eyes tracking her as she moved among the courtiers. He felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest, a tension that made him pause before speaking. Elara, once so easy to dismiss, had become unpredictable. Dangerous, perhaps, but also fascinating in ways he did not yet understand. Elara felt the threads of fate stirring again, faint and subtle, guiding her thoughts. She began to test her newfound abilities quietly, influencing small events, nudging conversations, and observing how the court reacted. Each success was a thrill, but also a reminder. Power must be handled with care. The forest's whispers echoed in her mind, warning her not to lose herself in the pursuit of influence. By the end of the day, the court had shifted subtly. Allies and enemies alike began to see her differently. Even Darian, despite himself, felt a grudging acknowledgement that the girl he had humiliated was no longer powerless. As the sun set, painting the sky in crimson and violet, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Elara stood at a balcony overlooking the gardens, the cool evening air brushing her face. She thought of Darian, of the forest, and of the power she now carried. The threads of fate were no longer distant whispers. They were something she could feel, something she could shape. And yet, in the shadows beyond the palace walls, a darker force watched. The forest had not given up its secrets, and the supernatural presence that had first guided her lingered still, waiting to see if she would falter. Elara clenched her fists, feeling both fear and exhilaration. She had survived the forest. She had tasted power. And she would not be humiliated again. Tomorrow, the court would see a new Elara. Stronger, wiser, and ready to reclaim what had been taken from her, not with cruelty, but with quiet, unyielding force. The night deepened, stars gleaming like scattered silver threads across the sky. And somewhere in the darkness the first whispers of the next challenge stirred, hinting at trials that would test not just her power, but her heart. The story of Elara had truly begun. The morning sun rose over Eldara like a pale sentinel, casting long shadows over the castle towers. The air was crisp and heavy with the scent of blooming nightshade, a subtle reminder that the kingdom's forests were not as benign as they seemed. Rumors of Elara's disappearance and her return with a strange, quiet confidence had spread throughout the court. Whispers followed her as she walked the marble corridors, her steps measured, graceful, yet carrying an unmistakable edge of power. Lord Darian noticed immediately. He had come to expect her resilience, but each day revealed another layer, a strength that made him pause in ways he had never imagined. It unsettled him, not with fear exactly, but with a tension he could not name. He watched her now as she passed through the audience chamber, her gaze steady, unflinching, and yet aware of every thread of movement around her. The court's air was thick with tension. Nobles who had once laughed at her now avoided her eyes, uncertain whether to fear her or respect her. Some whispered that she had made a pact with forces older than the kingdom, while others believed her transformation came from sheer will. Inspiration.
Elara paid them no mind. She had learned that attention could be both a weapon and a trap, and she would wield it carefully.
Inspiration. By midday, news arrived from the forest of whispers, which had long remained a boundary no man dared cross, had begun to spread. Inspiration. Its shadows crept closer to the kingdom with each passing day, twisting the trees into unnatural shapes, black vines reaching like fingers toward the castle walls. Travelers had disappeared, and whispers of ghostly figures roaming the edge of the woods stirred fear even among hardened soldiers.
The king called an urgent council, and Elara was summoned.
Inspiration. She entered the chamber with calm authority, her green gown brushing the floor, silver threads glinting in the light. The lords and ladies turned toward her, some with hope, others with suspicion. Inspiration. Darien stood among them, his posture tense, his eyes tracking her movements. "You have been to the forest," the king said, voice grave. "What have you learned? Can we contain this darkness before it consumes us?" Elara stepped forward, her gaze steady. "The forest is not merely dark. It is alive," she said. "It tests those who enter, and it grows stronger when ignored." "The threat is not only to the land, but to the court itself. The threads of fate show me that if we act wisely, we can contain it, but only if we work together." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some doubted her. Some nodded, impressed by her confidence. "Up! Up!" Darian's expression remained unreadable, but she sensed the faintest flicker of respect. "Together?" he asked, his voice low, directed at her. "Do you truly believe we can survive if we face the forest united?" Elara's eyes met his. "I do, Baradi. But we must learn to trust each other, even if only for the sake of the kingdom." For the first time, Darian hesitated. He had underestimated her, yes, but now he could see that the girl he had humiliated had become something far beyond his expectation. Pride and curiosity warred within him, and he finally nodded. "Very well," he said. "We act together. But know this, I will not tolerate failure." That evening they rode toward the forest together, the king's guards following at a careful distance. The path was lined with twisted roots and shadowed trees, the air thick with whispers that seemed to carry secrets. Elara felt the threads of fate tugging at her mind, guiding her steps, offering glimpses of danger and hints of how to navigate it. Darien rode beside her, silent and watchful, the weight of his presence both comforting and unsettling. "You are different," he said finally, breaking the silence.
"I have known many in the court, but none have faced what you faced with such composure. Most would falter."
Elara's lips curved faintly. "Most would flee," she said. I have learned that fear can be a guide if you do not let it control you." He studied her, the light from the moon catching the edges of his sharp features. "And yet," "Some fear is unavoidable," he said. "Even you cannot see all threads. Not yet." Her eyes flicked toward him, meeting his gaze steadily. "Perhaps," she said. "But I will learn, and I will survive." The forest closed around them as they entered its shadowed heart. Vines twisted like living serpents, and the air grew colder, heavy with a subtle, unnatural mist. Sounds echoed strangely, as if the forest itself was listening. The threads in Elara's mind vibrated, showing her glimpses of creatures she could barely comprehend, shapes moving just beyond sight, whispering threats, warnings, and riddles. all at once. "This is more than mere shadows," Darian muttered. "But I have faced many dangers, but nothing like this." Elara nodded. "The forest tests our hearts as much as our bodies." Breath. "Trust yourself. Trust the path. Beration. Trust me." He hesitated, then nodded once.
I will try. The first challenge came swiftly. A wall of black vines erupted before them, reaching toward the horses and men.
Beration. The soldiers faltered, unsure how to cut through. Elara dismounted, her hands raised, and a silver light pulsed from her palms. Beration. The vines recoiled, as if recognizing a force older than their own. "Careful," she whispered to Darian. "This is not brute strength. We must bend it, not destroy it." He watched as she moved gracefully, guiding the energy of the forest rather than fighting it outright. Slowly, the vines unwound, retreating into the shadows. The soldiers stared in awe, and even Darian's eyes widened. Beration.
"You? How?" he began, but she cut him off with a sharp glance. "Focus," she said.
There is more ahead. They pressed deeper into the forest, facing trial after trial. Illusions tested their fears. Shadows of the past, voices of those they loved or lost, visions of failure and betrayal. Darian confronted his arrogance, seeing the consequences of cruelty and pride laid bare before him. Elara faced the humiliation of the court again, but she transformed it into strength, each vision reinforcing her resolve. Through it all they moved together, sometimes arguing, sometimes silent, their bond growing in tension and mutual respect. Neither admitted it, but a strange, quiet fascination stirred between them, as if the forest itself had drawn their souls close. At last they came to a clearing where a pool of silver water reflected the moonlight, like liquid glass. The forest fell silent, the whispers fading to nothing. In the center of the pool floated a small, glowing stone, the heart of the forest's power.
The final test, Elara whispered.
We must touch it together. Only unity can claim its strength. Darian nodded, though unease shadowed his face.
"Together," he agreed. They stepped forward, hands brushing instinctively before clasping over the glowing stone.
Light surged around them, filling the clearing with warmth and brilliance. Images flashed before their eyes, visions of the court, of the kingdom, of the future they could shape. They saw the threads of fate bending to their combined will, yet always fragile, always demanding care.
When the light faded, they were breathless, standing side by side.
The forest shadows no longer reached for them with hostility. Instead, they seemed to recognize the bond forged in courage, trust, and strength. Elara felt a deep understanding settle over her. Her power was no longer merely her own. It was tied to choices, to hearts, to those who walked beside her. And Darian, for all his arrogance, had proven himself worthy of trust. They did not speak immediately, letting the silence carry the weight of what had occurred. But the air between them was charged, a mixture of relief, admiration, and unspoken questions. Returning to the palace, they found the court awaiting news, rumors having grown wilder in their absence. Some feared they would return empty-handed, consumed by the forest. Others whispered of strange lights, heard in the distance at night. Elara stepped forward, confident and composed.
The forest is contained for now, she announced. Its power is ancient and dangerous, but it can be guided. We must act with wisdom and with unity, the nobles murmured among themselves.
Some bowed in respect, others scowled in suspicion. Darian's gaze met hers across the hall. He inclined his head once, a silent acknowledgement. For the first time, Elora did not feel the sting of humiliation. Desperation. She had faced fear, darkness, and doubt, and emerged stronger. The threads of fate were now within her grasp, and she was ready to shape them. Desperation. Yet, as the sun set over Eldara, a shadow flickered at the edge of the palace grounds. Unseen, but watching. A darker force had taken notice of her growing power. The forest's influence had not ended. It was only beginning. Elara felt the pull in her mind again, faint and insistent. She did not yet understand the full scope of what awaited her, but one truth was clear. The reckoning had only just begun. And this time, she would face it, not as a frightened girl, but as a force to be reckoned with. The first light of dawn broke over Eldara, brushing the palace towers with gold and pink. But the beauty of the morning could not mask the tension that gripped the kingdom. Rage had grown overnight, twisting the trees into unnatural shapes, and whispers of a darker force spread among the soldiers and nobles alike.
Elara stood at the balcony of the high tower, the wind tugging at her silver-threaded braid.
Her green gown clung lightly to her shoulders, but it was not her appearance that radiated strength. It was the aura of quiet certainty she now carried. The trials of the forest had changed her, and she understood more than ever the threads of fate, their fragility, and their power. Behind her, Darian entered silently, his presence as solid and commanding as ever. He did not speak at first, merely observing her. When he finally did, his voice was low, almost hesitant. "The shadow crows," he said. Stronger than anything I have faced before. Elara turned to him, her eyes steady. "I know, but we have faced the forest together. We can face this too. The threads of fate are ours to guide." He studied her, seeing the transformation she had undergone. The girl he had humiliated, the one who had once trembled under his laughter, now stood with the strength of someone who had touched destiny itself. Respect and a subtle admiration flickered in his dark eyes.
"You have changed more than I imagined," he admitted. "And you must change too," she replied softly though firmly.
"We cannot win if either of us clings to old arrogance or fear." Darian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then we act as one." The shadow at the forest's edge surged that evening. Dark mist coiled over the trees, reaching toward the kingdom like serpents of living smoke. Strange, whispering voices echoed, testing the courage of those who listened. Soldiers faltered, afraid to step forward. But Elara and Darian moved without hesitation. Together they approached the forest, the threads of fate guiding each step. "Elara," Darian said quietly, "if this darkness, if it should overwhelm us." "It will not," she said. "We have the strength, and we have each other." That is more than enough. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The forest itself seemed to breathe, twisting paths and dark shapes reaching out. Elara felt the pulse of the threads within her, warning her of danger, revealing glimpses of the creatures that lurked just beyond sight. And then they appeared, figures of shadow and mist, grotesque in form yet eerily human, began to emerge from the darkness. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting centuries of anger and curse. They surged forward with silent menace, testing the courage of the two who dared enter the forest's heart. Elara raised her hand, silver light flowing from her palms. The creatures recoiled, hissing as though the light burned more than their eyes could withstand. Darian followed, drawing his sword, its blade glinting with the strange, cold magic he had never felt before. The forest seemed to bend toward them, reacting to their unity. "You must trust yourself,"
Alara whispered, her voice carried by the wind. "And trust me." He nodded, a flicker of vulnerability passing across his stern face.
Together they moved forward, striking with precision and guiding Alara's light, weaving strength with courage, each step a careful negotiation with the shadowy forces. The creatures surged again, stronger this time, their voices whispering doubt and fear. Breath. Darian faltered, the shadows whispering of failure, of humiliation past and future. But Alara's gaze locked onto his. "Do not let them claim you," she said. "Not now! Not ever!" Our strength is together. And in that moment, Darian let go of arrogance and pride. He trusted her, fully and without reservation. Together, their combined will created a force that radiated outward, silver and gold light mingling with the shadow until the creatures wailed and melted into nothingness, leaving only the twisting forest behind. The clearing at the forest's heart awaited them. A pool of black water, rippling unnaturally under the moonlight. The heart of the shadow's power. The air was heavy with magic older than the kingdom itself, a force that seemed to know their every thought. Alara stepped forward, her hands raised over the water. Darian stood beside her, sword in hand, ready for whatever might emerge. "The threads must be tied," Alara said softly. "This cannot end with destruction. It must end with balance." Power without wisdom consumes itself. Darian nodded, standing close. "I will stand with you, no matter the cost." Together they laid hands over the water. Light poured from Alara, steady and pure, merging with the strength and courage emanating from Darian. The threads of fate seemed to shimmer visibly around them, moving in intricate patterns, bending the shadows into shapes of light. The forest shrieked, twisting and turning in resistance, yet it could not withstand the unity of their hearts and wills. In that moment, visions flashed before them, of the kingdom restored, of the court no longer divided by fear, of people no longer intimidated by cruelty, of futures where choice and courage could guide destiny. The threads of fate wove a new pattern, one that included both the power of the individual and the strength of partnership. When the light finally faded, they found themselves alone in the clearing. The forest shadows had receded, replaced by a gentle mist that shimmered silver in the moonlight. The trees, though still twisted, no longer moved with malice. The darkness had been tamed, not destroyed, but balanced. Returning to the palace, dawn breaking over the mountains, they were greeted with astonished faces. Nobles and soldiers alike stared at Alara and Darian, now side by side, both changed by the trials. The whispers of fear and doubt fell silent, replaced by awe and respect. The king stepped forward, his gaze filled with pride. "You have faced the impossible," he said. "Not only with courage, but with wisdom. You have saved the kingdom." The kingdom was never in the hands of one alone. Strength is in unity, in courage, and in the choices we make. Darian, standing beside her, added, "And sometimes, humility and trust can be stronger than any sword or spell." The court, humbled and amazed, slowly began to bow and offer their respect. Even those who had doubted her now recognized Alara as a force not to be ignored. And Darian, once the man who humiliated her, now stood in silent acknowledgement of the power she carried, not only over the threads of fate, but over hearts and minds alike. In the quiet of the evening, Alara stood in the palace gardens, watching the sun set in flames of crimson and gold. Darian approached silently, offering no words, only a presence that had become familiar and steady.
You have changed the course of fate, he said finally, breaking the silence. And yet, I wonder if I have changed more than I realize. We have both changed, she replied. The forest taught me that power is nothing without responsibility, and courage is nothing without trust. I hope you have learned that too.
Darian looked at her, his expression softening. I have, he said, and I...
I am grateful. More than I expected to be. The night wrapped around them, a gentle shroud of stars overhead. For the first time, neither humiliation, fear, nor doubt shadowed their hearts. They had faced darkness together, shaped destiny with their choices, and emerged not only victorious but transformed. Elara felt the threads of fate pulse gently in her mind, no longer chaotic, no longer oppressive. They were steady, a pattern she could navigate, and perhaps, one day, even guide. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph, standing beside the man who had once humiliated her, now a partner, an ally, and perhaps something more. The kingdom of Eldara would remember this day, not as the day a girl was humiliated, but as the day a queen of courage and wisdom rose, shaping her destiny, balancing light and shadow.
And reminding all who dwelled in the court that power tempered with heart could transform even the darkest of challenges.
And somewhere beyond the mountains, the whispers of the forest stirred once more, faint and distant, a reminder that the world still held mysteries, and that courage would always be tested. But Elara no longer feared the threads of fate. She understood them, and she was ready for whatever came next. The story had reached its dawn, and the kingdom breathed anew. The girl who had been humiliated had become a legend whispered in silver light, a force that even shadows dared not challenge.